Salut! Today we're going to go over lesson 28, which is basically more relative pronouns. But don't click out yet. I'm going to help you understand why we're learning them like this. There are also 2 points that I won't cover in this video because honestly, they're side notes and you can understand them easily by just reading the notes. So as usual, I invite you to download the notes by clicking on the link in the description below. And make sure you practice and do the exercises to fully digest this lesson. Alright, so the relative pronouns we need to see today are relative pronouns when there is a preposition and also when it's something that is possessed. Basically, when you say to which or with whom in English and whose. But let me make a little aparté here and explain to you what's the point of learning this and maybe give you a little tip on how to learn French. Of course, when trying to communicate with someone in French, you are not going to break your head trying to figure out if a word is an object or a subject. The reason we learn these complicated things is so you are able to understand why something is happening in grammar terms. But in the end, you also need to learn a few examples by heart so that your brain makes that word connection when you need it. Think of it as your brain as an AI, basically. You're trained with sets of words and sentences, and you can jumble them together to form new sentences. If you've learned by heart j'aime le café and j'aime la soupe, you don't need to think a lot about grammar to make the sentence j'aime la salade. But what makes you superior to an AI is that you are able, if need be, to explain why something is here or there. And when you run into an impasse, knowing all the basic French grammar will help you move further and further. This is why I always start the first lesson of the year telling people that I don't train parrots. Because just learning by repeating will have you stuck at a beginner or intermediate level at best. If you keep learning all the lessons from this class, and of course you keep practicing, you will be able to go as far as you're able to continue without ever hitting a wall. Alright, end of my not so little aparté. And let's get to our relative pronouns lequel, laquelle, and lesquels, masculine and feminine. First, if you remember our lesson on the interrogative adjective which was in French quel, quelle, quelle, and quelle, all spelled differently, this should be easier because basically the relative pronoun lequel and all its forms are the same as the interrogative adjective quel, except it has an article attached to it. Think of it as the which, if it helps. Now, to understand how and why we use this in French, I'm going to need you to do a little English exercise. You may have heard that in English, you should never end a sentence with a preposition. Something that was actually made up by a Latin scholar in the 18th century and eventually took on. Of course, nowadays, everyone does it in English and nobody cares. Well, in French, this is actually true. I guess probably because it is, after all, a Latin language. So in French, we never end a sentence with a preposition. This is why I'm going to try to show you how we make a sentence in French when it ends with a preposition in English. And this will use the relative pronouns we're learning today. Okay, let's take an example. The friend I'm eating with. This ends with a preposition with. So how would you say this in English without ending the sentence with the preposition with? The only way to do this is to say the friend with whom I'm eating. Another example is the book I'm traveling with. In English, if you try to say this without ending with the preposition with, you will say the book with which I'm traveling. Well, here you have our relative pronouns of the day. It will be in English the word whom or which after a preposition. Now, hopefully this is clear. And now all you have to do is keep the preposition where it is in that more complicated sentence and add right after either lequel, laquelle, lesquels, or lesquels feminine plural depending on what the word which or whom in English refers to. If it's masculine singular, for example, le livre, it will be lequel. If it's feminine singular, for example, la fleur, it will be laquelle. etc. So let's see this into action with some examples. The friend I'm eating with is nice. Let's turn this sentence the way we think about it in French, and it becomes the friend with whom I'm eating is nice. Now in French, this would be l'ami avec lequel je mange est gentil. Using the preposition avec for with and the relative pronoun lequel for whom, because we chose that our friend was a man in this example. Of course, if the friend was a woman, we would then say l'ami avec laquelle je mange est gentille. Alright, now there's a bit of a problem with the preposition a. But it makes sense if you remember our definite articles le, la, and les. We have learned that we cannot say a, le in French and it becomes au, au. And we cannot say a, les and it becomes au, aux. Well, it's the same here. We cannot say a, lequel, so it becomes auquel. And we cannot say a, lesquels or a, lesquels feminine plural, so it becomes auquel and auquel with double L, ES for the feminine plural. Here is an example of this. The friend I'm speaking to is Luke. This, of course, if we think of how we make this sentence in French, it becomes the friend to whom I'm speaking is Luke. So remember that to speak to in French is parler à. Because of that preposition à, our sentence will be l'ami auquel je parle est Luc. Here we used auquel because we could not say à lequel. Alright, there are more visual examples in the notes to help you understand how this all works. So let's jump to our other relative pronoun of the day. The possessive relative pronoun whose in English. First, this is pretty simple. If you see the word whose, use the word dont, D-O-N-T in French. There are just two tiny little points I need to make. First, what's possessed will need an article in French where there's none in English. If I say the cat whose toy is broken, in French you will have to imagine this as the cat whose the toy is broken. I think we're all clear here that the cat possesses the toy. Now, depending on if what is possessed, the toy here, is the subject or the object of the following clause, you will need that word, the toy, in a different spot. Let's start with the easy one. If the object possessed, the toy, is the subject of the second clause, which it is in our first example, it will come right after, just like in English. So our example, the cat whose toy is broken, will be le chat dont le jouet est cassé. Nothing fancy here. Just replace whose by dont and move on. Now, if you're introducing another subject to this possessed object, the toy, you will need to put that object after the second verb. Let's imagine I'm breaking the toy now. This means that the toy is no longer the subject of to break. I am the one who's the subject and the toy is what I break, my object. The sentence will be in English, the cat whose toy I break. Well, as I said, the toy will need to come after the verb. So we imagine this sentence in French as the cat whose I break the toy. And it will be in French, le chat dont je casse le jouet. That's it. Nothing more to that one. Just keep the article and just make sure to put the possessed thing in the end if it's not the subject of your following clause. Here are one more example with both ways, so you can see it again. The plane whose door is shut will be l'avion dont la porte est fermée. But the plane whose door I closed will be l'avion dont j'ai fermé la porte. Alright, that's it for today. And remember to check out the notes to see the point on the adverb only, ne que, and on the verb s'agir de. And before I go, could you use a relative pronoun with a preposition or a possessive relative pronoun in a sentence in the comments below? Something like, The lesson I struggle with is the relative pronouns. I'm looking forward to reading your ideas, and of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them down here as well. In the meantime, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you on the next one. Au revoir.